Hi Ascenders, Nathan Morrow here. Welcome to our video on the 4Ts, where we answer the question, what is all this stuff? Before we begin, I'd like to just give a shout out to my mom, Mary Morrow. This whole idea came about in a conversation that was going on between my mother, myself, and my daughter. And so I just want to thank her for kind of planting the seeds and helping me to develop this concept. Okay, so the 4Ts is a pretty simple framework, and the idea here is to help our kids get a handle on what is all this stuff in their life and to kind of decide where does value lie and what stuff is worth keeping, when's it time to get rid of stuff, and all that sort of thing. So just about any object can fall into one of these categories, though some things will fall into two categories. And the categories are treasure, tools, toys, and trash. And they really do have kind of a descending value added to them. So treasures are high value items. And we'll get into discussion of value in just a minute here. But tools are high utility items. And then toys are high fun items, and trash has really no value and no utility. So, treasure, high value items. Now, value can be kind of like universal value, or it can just be sentimental value. So when we talk about this idea of universal value, it's this idea that everybody agrees that this thing is a valuable item, or it's a trade instrument, or at least a large group of people would agree. So if you've got cash, you've got gold, you've got jewels, these are things that everybody's going to be like, oh yeah, I totally recognize the value because it is built into our cultural way of looking at things. On the other hand, if some things have just value to you or to a very small group of people, that sentimental value is going to be treasure for you, but it won't necessarily be treasure for others. And so, that picture of your kids, that rock that you found on your honeymoon, or this memento that your first significant other gave you, these sorts of things have sentimental value, but they won't necessarily be something that you can use to bail you out of debt in the future. So tools have high utility in that they serve a particular function. A hammer is good for pounding, knife is good for cutting, a shovel is good for digging, a flashlight is good for illuminating. So the idea here is when we're talking to our kids and we're like, whoa, hey, that's not a toy, because it's a tool, and we want to make sure that they recognize this thing is a tool and we're not playing with it, we are utilizing it, and the difference between that play and that work function. Now, toys have high fun because you play with them, so Legos and Stuffies, that placemat at the restaurant with the games and the coloring on it, your action figure, these are all toys. And the idea is that generally speaking, toys aren't going to harm you like a tool might if you use it wrong, though any parent who has walked through the room at night and stepped on a loose Lego will know that that is not necessarily true of all toys, that they're going to hurt you sometimes, but generally speaking, toys fall into this, mostly harmless category. And then we've got trash, which really has no value and no utility. Trash, it's time to get thrown out. For most people, this is going to be pretty obvious what this is. Broken things or things that are, crumpled up pieces of paper, old food containers, and things like this. So the reason we want to make sure we talk about this is so that kids can understand that there's a place for trash. It goes into the recycling, it goes into the garbage. We need to get rid of it so that it's not cluttering up our lives. So the usefulness of this structure is to frame conversations and answer questions. So when you're looking at any object, especially if your kids are cleaning their rooms or something like that, or if they're helping you clean the house, The framework can help to answer questions like, okay, so what do I do with this? How do I use this? So if they're building something, they're using a bunch of tools. How do I use this tool? You see the old images of like the parent is out there working on something, they're building the doghouse or something, and the kid is using their toys and they're pretending to be building something along with the adult. The toy is used to play and to mimic work. But when they start to actually handle those tools, they should know how to use them properly, how to use them safely. Where do I put this? Especially with the question, when I'm done. So if this is treasure, do I just throw it on the floor, or do I put it away somewhere safe? If it's trash, do I throw it on the floor, or do I put it into the trash can? How do I care for this thing? If it's treasure, we might want to really be, pampering of this thing. If it's a painting, for example, okay, well, this isn't a toy. We can't play with this painting. We have to keep it up on the wall. We don't touch it. If it is a tool, well, we need to clean this tool when we're done with it, or we need to put it away back in its place. And similarly, how do I dispose of this? If it's junk, okay, we just throw it in the trash can. We don't worry about that, or we recycle it, or whatever. If it's a tool, it might have some value. We don't just throw it away. Maybe we put it in our yard sale. If it's treasure, maybe we have some special way that we, put it on eBay or something to see how much money we can get for it. So it helps to frame these questions and to answer these questions when kids are wondering, okay, so what about this thing? And when somebody gives them something, to then kind of categorize it. Well, what is this thing? Is this a toy? Is this one of grandma's special treasures? This is worth some money and she's giving it to me, so I also need to take care of it. It's a memento from a relative. So there's a lot of different ways that these can be used. But I like this idea of 4 T's because the 4 T's really stick out in the mind, and it's kind of a simple way for kids to grasp the conversation. So, combos. Some objects are going to fall into more than one category, and oftentimes it's going to be this category where something might be a tool or it might be a toy, but is also going to be considered treasure because things may be very valuable. So there's a ton of examples of things like this where something is a tool, but it's a very expensive tool. You're talking about a chainsaw or something like that. You're talking about a car. It's a tool that gets you from one place to another, but it's also treasure. It might be very valuable depending on what kind of car you have. Some things might be considered toys, but they're very rare toys, and so the value on those toys might be very high, or they're just, initially a very expensive toy. Legos, for example, can be very expensive, and so there are whole stores that operate on the idea of buying and selling Legos, and so there's some value there that makes them almost treasure-like. And so we want to make sure that kids understand that these categories don't necessarily have to be singular, but there are some things that might fall into one or more categories so that they have multiple ways that we want to look at them. And then there's the transformers. Things change because circumstances change. So you might have something like an original Star Wars action figure back from the 70s. So it was originally thought of as a toy. We bought it at the store, we took it out of its package, and we played with it. Then we put it in a box, and it sat there for years and years. But luckily enough, we didn't lose the original weapons, and so now it's one of those things where it's a collector's item, and so it might still be a toy, but you might look at that and say, no, we don't want to use this as a toy. We want to keep this as treasure. Differently, somebody has a box in their garage, they open it up and find a bunch of action figures like this that are in their original packages. Now we're talking about something where it's like, well, it used to be a toy, but it's not a toy anymore. You take that out of its package and you're going to destroy the value that is intrinsic within an original packaged action figure. So those sorts of things, they may change over time because of the circumstances around them. These things, are very rare, the original ones, and so there are collectors out there that want that original one in its original package. So if you can have that thing, that becomes treasure. They would never think of playing with it. They would never think of turning it back into a toy, taking it out of its package, because that's not what it is to them. Stock is an example. Over time, the stock market has a tendency to rise, but if we look at it over a short term, something might be very valuable one day, and you have people who talk about, oh, the stock market took a hit and I lost half of my retirement. Okay, so that stock lost value. So it was very valuable. It was treasure, but Enron, the CEO, did some crazy stuff, and so their stock went completely to zero. So now that stuff has turned into trash. Holding that stock is worthless. Cryptocurrencies will go through these sorts of things as well. Some people are very skeptical about them because the value is very speculative. But other people look at them and they see treasure. So if you were one of those people who somehow got an original Bitcoin way back when they were first being discovered, and you took a chance on that, and suddenly now that they're worth a lot of money, so that thing turned from something that was nothing into something that was very valuable. That ceramic handprint. The clay that it was built from was not very valuable. It was a couple of dollars down at the art store, but your kid put their handprint in it, and now it's treasure for you. When you pass, that ceramic handprint may become trash. Nobody looks at it and says, oh, that's my kid's handprint, and so now it's not something that has value to anybody else. That antique teapot. So originally it was a teapot, then it became an antique over a long period of time, and then somebody knocks it off the table and it smashes on the ground. It went from a tool to treasure to trash, depending on those circumstances. So these are things that change over time, and we want our kids to kind of wrap their brains around that as well. All right, so that does it for our conversation on the 4 T's. I hope you found this useful. And if you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and put them below or reach out to us. And remember, at Ascent, we change lives.